Oh, God is good. And so, for whatever happens next, I thank God. I'm here to tell you a story about the time that I basically challenged God for a sign. I prayed and asked Him for a sign, and I will tell you the story. Okay, so back in 2014, around June, I met Ali Stevens. He's on the Walk in Faith. If you haven't heard about him, Google him. The man's amazing. His name is Ali Stevens. He's on the Walk in Faith. He uh, he lost his daughter and his wife to cancer, and he was touched by God to leave everything he had out in Oceanside, California, and set out on a walk in faith. He's pulling a 400-pound rickshaw with his dog Miss Roxy on the rickshaw, and he's stopping in every town, and he's meeting people, and he's showing the world that if you walk in faith, that anything's possible. And so he overcame the pain and the hurt of two beautiful people that he had in his life, and he set out with no money and just a goal to get to Miami, Florida. So from Oceanside, California to Miami, Florida, that's the goal, and he's going to do everything and go beyond all measures by the faith of God, by the grace of God, that he's going to get there with the strength from God. And so, I mean, it took him 5 years to walk across the state of Texas. That's just man. Just try to wrap your mind around that. That I know I couldn't do that. And so, I'll fast forward a little bit through his walk. Um, uh, he ended up in Houma, Louisiana. 5 years later, after leaving Oceanside, California, he ended up in Houma, Louisiana. 5 years later, and I had the wonderful privilege of meeting this man of God. And let me tell you, man, when I met him back in June and in July, in the middle of the summer of 2014, I met this man. I was living a simple life. I was promoting these events that led to sin. I was using reckless words and just not representing the joys of heaven at all. And I was blinded by the worldly things. And so I meet this man of God, and I tell you, every time I was around this man, I just wanted to cut a backflip, and I can't do a backflip. And I mean, he would just bring the best out of me, and the joy from this man's presence. It was undeniably God. You know what I mean? God lives in this man, and I fell in love with his beautiful passion and the walk in faith and what it meant. And so when he was going to leave, about a week before it, he was set out to leave. He stayed in Houma for 6 weeks. His dog had heartworms, and so that's how he ended up in Houma. And a vet took care of Miss Roxy. And so anyway, before he left, I promised him, look, man, I'm gonna walk with you from Houma to New Orleans. And of course, oh no, there's no way, you're not gonna. And so he challenged me, called me, on it, and so I ended up walking with him, and so did Stanley Woods, and my girlfriend, Miss Hillary Lyons. Actually, she's my wife now. I bet nobody knew that. Anyway, so us four set out on this walk, and man, it was an amazing journey. They walked the first, Stanley Woods and Hillary, of course. We walked the first day about 18 miles, and so they went home that night, and I stayed with Ali, and we ended up walking 7 nights, 8 days. We made it to New Orleans, and so once we made it to New Orleans, I'm still living in my simple ways. You know, um, this putting the worldly things, idolizing things, drinking. I was drinking heavily, and besides all that, so it gets, man. So Ali obviously continued on his walk, and I went to the Home of Grace. That was in July when we did the walk, and I went to a beautiful place by the name of the Home of Grace, and it's in Van Cleve, Mississippi, and it was by far the best decision of my life. Um, when I when I when I got there, I was completely broken, run down, and ashamed. I was a secret sinner. I was living a life that it was an illusion. People thought I had all these great things and great riches and of the world, and I didn't have anything. I was empty. I was alone. I was living in a dark place. And I went to the Home of Grace, and I got there on October 22nd, 2014. It was a Wednesday, and on that Sunday night, I prayed to God, and I challenged God, and tears running down my face, dripping, just snotting everywhere. I challenged God. If you don't show me a sign, I'm calling somebody to come get me tomorrow. So I'm laying in my bed. I'm praying to God. If you don't show me a sign, God, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. You know, I'm challenged into all this faith and religion and everything's real. So that Monday morning I wake up, and a servant leader comes to my room at the Home of Grace, Andrew Neely, and he asked me about the Walk in Faith. Somebody on the campus had seen my Walk in Faith tattoo, and so I actually had a flyer from that Josh Mount had made, and it was a picture of me, Allie, and I, and Roxy, and it was just a flyer that we made, and Allie was handing them out during the walk and signing them for people. And so I showed Andrew, and I told Andrew all about the walk, and so now this is that next morning. So about 11 o'clock that day, Andrew, Taylor Edwards, Jeff McCullough, Tim Sheehan, and John Hamner, and Andrew Neely drove us. We all had to go to the health unit to get a tuberculosis and HIV test. You know, that's something protocol whenever you go into rehab or recovery program. You have to get that. And so, being that we didn't get it before we went, us 6 men set out and went to the health unit. And so that Sunday night I prayed for a sign. So fast forward to the next day, I'm sitting in the health unit waiting room, and I had some Living So Loud bands, and you know, at that time I thought I was still cool. I was living so loud, ooh. And so I'm actually handing out Living So Loud bracelets to the women behind the counter at the health unit. And one of the girls actually Googles Living So Loud. And she's like, you know, oh gosh, look at this video. This is funny, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so Andrew Neely starts yelling. I think I'm in trouble, right? Because I'm talking to the people I shouldn't be talking to. And Andrew's, Tubes, look, bro, there's your boy. And Allie Stevens is in front of the building. And this is in Biloxi, Mississippi, by the way. Last time I saw him was in 4 or 5 months before that, in New Orleans. And I ran out and I embraced him, and he pushes me away. He's holding me. He looks at me and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Man, I had a route mapped out. But when I got to a turn I was supposed to take, God said, go down 2 more streets, take a right. I need to show you something. And you come running out of a building, Chase." And I just, at that moment, I dropped to my knees and surrendered everything in my life to God. And told him that you're in control. I trust in you 100%. You have full control over my life. I will never challenge you again. And there is no odds to that. There's not 1 in a million, or, you know, whatever. That's 1 in God. There was no odds for me to see Allie Stevens that day in Biloxi. And, you know, that's the moment. That's the time that I challenged God for a sign. I hope you enjoyed. Man.
And then we have this guy here, Chase Tubes. Awesome guy. He has this company called Living So Loud. He gives things, and he liked my walk so much he decided to walk with me from Oklahoma to Louisiana. So he made a flyer passed out with him and me on it, and our walk. It's called Walk in Faith. He even has a tattooed on his arm, Walk in Faith. And that is just like this inspired him so much. Yes. And then I was in Mississippi, and he was going to a rehab 8 months later, and I happened to run across him. He just happened to be talking about me that morning in the hospital with all the clients, and they looked out the window, and there I was walking by. It was a beautiful reunion. He can tell you about it himself. And then I met Kermit. He's does